All right, guys, we are at 1863 Vicksburg. Now, we were just talking about July 4th, 1863. Vicksburg is going to be the same thing because Vicksburg is going to surrender on the day after Gettysburg is over. So there is a lot going on. July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and then the 4th, it's all set up and done. It's kind of crazy to think that it all happens right there on July 4th. What happened was, remember, Grant was in the West. He was going to do the Mississippi River, try and shut off that part for the Anaconda Plan. And he had won at Nashville, and he had won at Shiloh, and he was on the way to Vicksburg. Vicksburg is in Mississippi. You cannot own the Mississippi River unless you own Vicksburg. Vicksburg goes in like this river, and then there is a sharp little inlet turn, and then the river goes straight. So as you get to Vicksburg, I don't care how fast your boats are going, you have to slow down. You have to slow down to make that hairpin turn and then back. So with cannons right there at Vicksburg, whatever boat from the United States showed up, the whole way it's trying to get close to Vicksburg, it's going to be pounded and it's not going to make the turn, and they're going to own the river. So in May of 1863, Ulysses S. Grant shows up, and Ulysses S. Grant does something very, because like I said, the fort is up on a hill, the river's down here, they just can whale those boats. Grant sends in his boats at full speed. They are coming down as fast as those boats can possibly go, and they head straight. There, you got the hairpin turn, you're coming down, and then the hairpin turn. They don't turn. What they do is they run as fast as they can and then just run them straight up on the ground. Now they're under the cannons. The cannons can't shoot straight down. They can only shoot out at an angle as you would go around the turn. They didn't expect somebody to beach their boats and just run them aground. But as they did that, then the soldiers piled out of the boats, and then he had already sent some around from the other way, and they surround the city. Now, with the city surrounded and it's on the other side's a river, and you've got boats on this side and you got boats on the other side, they can't go anywhere. And so you have literally started to starve out Vicksburg. Vicksburg is going to be some rough starvation. They're going to, at first, the Southern soldiers are trapped in there. They eat all the food they have. They eat all the food from all the houses they have. Then they start eating their animals, the mules, the dogs, the things like that. They end up eating every pet that's in the city. And then after that, they begin to catch rats. And the soldiers go through eating rats. Then they were eating leather, because leather is just cowhide, and they would take their shoes and boil them and try and eat them. These guys were starving to death. This is when we were just talking about in our Zoom and everything. These guys are out there, and they've ran out of gunpowder. The North was throwing grenades, and yes, there were grenades in the Civil War. They were an interesting type. They almost looked like a lawn dart, where they had to come straight down, and that would set off the percussion, and it would make an explosion. They had the guys out there trying to catch the grenades before they hit the ground so they could cut them open and get the gunpowder out to be able to shoot their guns. Vicksburg it's lost it. And slowly, all through May, all through June, and into July, the soldiers are starved out. And on July 4th, once again, how ironic is that? The Southern Army down there, the Vicksburg, has to surrender. So on the same day up in Gettysburg, you've hurt Lee down south, you've hurt the Southern Army down there in Mississippi, and now, as of July 4th, 1863, the war has turned. Not only do we started some major victories, we now have officially enacted the Anaconda Plan. Now it's strangle them out. They can't use the river. They can't use the ocean. Slowly wear them down. And then, if you remember, the third part of the Anaconda Plan was then eventually to go for Richmond and take the capital out. So after Vicksburg, once again, the Union is in total control of the river. Here is some pictures right here. Is the Shirley House with Union bomb proofs covering the surrounding hillsides. See what I mean by bomb proofs? They've got the little things over their huts so that they don't get hit by grenades. If you look down there, you can see they've buried those into the ground so that they're not getting hit by the grenades and the bombs that are being thrown in nonstop the whole time they're there. There you go. Now it leads to Chickamauga. This is right here in our home state of Tennessee. It's on the other side. It's into Georgia, but it's right there at the state line and everything. What happens at Chickamauga? You have got the army down into Chattanooga, and the Northern Army is not doing so well other than Grant. And so once he owns the Mississippi, they pull Grant out of Vicksburg, and they send him to take over for the Army of the North down in Chickamauga. He's going to get there at the time of the Battle of Chattanooga, which is after the Battle of Chickamauga. At this time, the South is in the city of Chattanooga. The North comes down. They venture outside of the city, and they run into each other at a little place called Chickamauga. They call it the Gettysburg of the South because you're going to have a lot of people die, and this is going to be probably the South's last major huge victory that is going to be good for them. So once again, Chickamauga, it is going to have the second highest number killed in battle. Also, it is more than one day. We talked about Antietam is going to have all this people die, and it's going to be 3 hours. It almost killed as much as these battles that last 2 days. Once again, with Chickamauga, it's the same thing. The first day is all just little skirmishes and clashes, although the skirmishes were won by the North mainly on the first day because they had at that point got something called a Sharps repeating rifle, and it was actually not having to be muzzle loaded. You could just like what we see with the old lever action type rifles of today. And so they're able to do some rapid fire, and they end up doing a lot of people. There's a lot of people die right there at the creek of Chickamauga. If you remember from back when we studied American history, you remember that Dragging Canoe's son left her down to because his dad agreed with the settlers, and he went to live down there and called his Indian group Chickamauga, which means the River of Blood, which is so interesting because that's where, once again, they said that it was doing that with so many people dying in the creek there that day. The next day, and this is where I wish I had a board to be able to show you all, the North lines up straight in the line, the South lines up across on the other side in straight line, and they are going to slam into each other. The only problem being you've got your North. One of the Northern generals misread his report where he was supposed to be stationed, and instead of being stationed on the line, he moves his guys and he's stationed behind another Northern group, which means there's an open gap right up through the middle of the line. But once again, without walkie-talkies, without aerial footage, they don't know that there is this wide open gap in their line that nobody's covering, and you got doubled up in a place that you don't even need to be doubled up. Well, the South decides they're going to send their one charge up and hit hard and funnel in that area. Y'all, it's just a fluke. It's not like they meant to or tried to. Where the South sends their guys is right to where there's a hole in the line. The soldiers actually march behind the Northern soldiers and are behind them before they realize we didn't run into the line. And then they start looking around and they realize, well, once you go straight up, now you can come behind the guys, and you got people attacking from the North is a complete rout. In fact, they all start to try to get out of there. They are fleeing. In fact, you've got one of your future presidents, President Garfield, is at the Battle of Chickamauga. I would love to find some of the stuff they said because he threw his stuff down and ran to Chattanooga. He got out of there. The North tries to get back up on top of the hill. There is a guy there by the name of George Thomas. He tells the rest of the North to flee, and him and his soldiers are going to hold it all. And they held on to this one little spot. You'd have to see it. It's beautiful up in the battlefields, right near the tower. You go back up there at the top of this hill. They got up on top of this hill, and they held the South off for the whole rest of the day. This one group of soldiers, the South kept coming up and being shoved back and coming up and being shoved back. And the whole time George Thomas is doing this, the rest of the North is retreating all the way to Chattanooga. And so George Thomas is going to be called the Rock of Chickamauga because of his, standing there and taking it. What's interesting, if you ever go to Chickamauga, which I tell you, it's an excellent battlefield to tour. They do reenactments there every year and everything off to the side, not on the battlefield part, but right in that area. It is just interesting. George Thomas's group, because they were like acorns, like mighty oaks. Every time they did something in battle, if you look, there'll be a little acorn on the plaque. And it lets you know where that group, so you can follow them around. Most people don't know that, but if you get there and you want to see an acorn on a plaque, you're dealing with George Thomas's group right there. So now the North has been beat at Chickamauga, and they run into Chattanooga. Here's some wonderful pictures. You can see there is the creek, the Chickamauga Creek that they call River of Blood. It's right there on the battlefield. You get a chance to see it, and you can see the troops all lined up. It's pretty neat. I love that she finds all these pictures for us. All right. This is where Lincoln puts Grant in charge of the Union Army. When Lincoln sends Grant there, at this time, the Northern Army is backed up into Chattanooga, and they're being starved out. They're actually doing the same thing that they did at Vicksburg to them. They've surrounded them, except for this one area of the city isn't surrounded because you can't get in and out of it. It is straight up and over these mountains. If you've ever been down to Chattanooga, you can see Signal Mountain, Lookout Mountain, and then you see this wall edge right there that runs beside Chattanooga all the way down to Hickson. Just this massive cliff and everything. That side was not being guarded because you can't go up and down it. But other than that, they've starved them in there. They went through eating the animals. Now they were actually eating their shoe leather. This is when Grant shows up. Grant shows up, and I love this story. If you're ever there, there's a little place called Brown's Ferry right there. There was a little battle there and everything. Chattanooga has so much history in it. But Brown's Ferry is right there, and at where Brown's Ferry is at is where Grant showed up. The night that he shows up, he wants to go down and look closer at the things that is going on, and he's riding along there at Brown's Ferry on the shore. And just across the river, there was a group of Southern soldiers. And they looked across, and they realized it was Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, you're talking dude from the unconditional surrender Grant. And they said those Southern soldiers, when they saw him, they could have easily picked up their gun and shot him and killed him, and you would have ended Grant. They said they had so much respect for him when they realized it was Grant. They said, boys, it's Ulysses S. Grant. And the guys formed into a line and saluted him and then walked away on the other side of the river to tell everybody that Grant is here now. But when they had a chance to shoot him, that wouldn't have been proper. He needs saluted. He is just something all to himself. He goes back there, and the first thing he does is he goes around that area and gathers up every mule, every horse that they can find, takes them from people, and he starts sending in supplies over the mountainous area, guys. They are going to kill off so many mules because it is such a steep, straight up and down thing. He is going to get 10,000 horses and mules and immediately starts getting supplies to that city, and the city is starting to eat again now. And so it took Grant going, you know what? We're going to do it if it's the hardest way to do it. And he goes in and starts sending supplies. And now his guys are starting to eat again. And while this is going on, they decide that the South has moved up to Lookout Mountain. If you've ever been to Chattanooga, Lookout Mountain is that tall hill off to the side that looks straight down into it. And if you look at Lookout Mountain, it's a straight up and down wall, pretty much. The South puts their cannons up there and begins to shell the city every day. And people are just being killed and being blown up and everything. And so if that's where the enemy is, that's where Ulysses S. Grant's going to go get him. And if you go into Chattanooga, as you start down towards Chattanooga, you come down a big hill. That is called Missionary Ridge. They had a bunch of guys all up and down Missionary Ridge to the south so that we couldn't get in and out of Chattanooga. So Grant decides he is going to go straight up and fight on Lookout Mountain. He needs somebody to stop the South from attacking them in the back as they do this. So to give an easy assignment. He gives it to George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, and tells him to stay there at Missionary Ridge, guard this, don't let anything happen. He's giving him an easy assignment. George Thomas and them thought the assignment was given to them because of the failure at Chickamauga, even though they were the only ones that didn't fail. And so George Thomas is going to take a total different approach to this. I'll just go ahead and tell you that part of it. When they start the attack, George Thomas, instead of staying there, starts to charge up the Missionary Ridge. They take the first line of rifle pits. They've moved the South back. They could stay there. George Thomas goes to the next roundup, and the next thing up, and the next thing. And before you know it, George Thomas and his one group of guys that held everybody off of Chickamauga take Missionary Ridge. He has totally earned his nickname, The Rock. So that's as good as I can do it, but I'll use my hand. But he is The Rock once again. Can you smell that cooking? Mm-hmm. Actually, that wasn't cooking. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So back to the Battle of Chattanooga. When they're standing there, and I wish you could have been there, you need to look at the Lookout Mountain to understand. I mean, like I say, straight up, they get out, they line up at the bottom of the mountain, and Grant's like, take the hill. And he orders them to take it. And they said everybody stood there and nobody moved. Because and I'm telling you, I know exactly what they were thinking. Everybody's thinking, really? You want me to climb this mountain while they're shooting at the top of me? How do I do this? How do I get up that? One of the best motivational speeches of all times happens right here. When they're all standing there and Grant goes, take the hill, and then nobody makes a sound, there was a soldier, don't know who he was, all of a sudden jumped up and screamed, here's how, and took off running. I think that's hilarious because he answered the question everybody's thinking, how in the world am I going to get up that hill? Here's how, and he just takes off running. He gets to the hill, he's climbing, gun strapped around your back, let's go. They are shooting down at you guys as they climb. The Northern Army is going to mountain climb up the side of this hill while they're being shot at, and it is a big, tall mountain. They're literally going to start to crawl through the clouds. It was one of those mornings where the clouds are a little lower, like when you get fog. They will crawl through the clouds going up the mountains and then come out on the top above the clouds. The Battle of Lookout Mountain is called the Battle Above the Clouds because they had to mountain climb while being shot at. Ulysses S. Grant is an animal. I just love this guy. So now the North is firmly in control of Chattanooga. Leads us to the other big battle that happens in Tennessee. It is Franklin, Tennessee. Okay? And in Franklin, Tennessee, Hood's Army of Tennessee, after all this beating, they have got to go back up to Virginia and join up with Lee. I tell you what, we will stop it right there, and I will pick up Franklin, Tennessee on your next one. So thank you.